Good morning from the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, and thanks for joining this live chat on YouTube and on Facebook. I'm Robert Hucci from the social media team. Europeans have seen their cost of living rise in the past months as high gas and electricity prices have caused a spike in the price of some goods and services. And the reopening of our economies following the pandemic has driven inflation to record highs. Russia's war in Ukraine has further deepened this crisis and is supposed to slow down the economic growth in the EU. Which are the sectors hit the most in the EU, and how are governments and the EU tackling this crisis? These are the questions that we want to ask today, and we'll hope to find some answers to them. So to discuss this and Parliament's efforts to tackle the crisis of cost of living in the EU on a European level, I am joined by two members of the Parliament, leaders of two committees. On my left, I have Dragoș Pîslaru, Chair of the Committee of the Parliament responsible for Employment and Social Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
And on my right, I have Luděk Niedermayer, who is Vice Chair of the Committee on the Economic and Monetary Affairs of the Parliament. Welcome. Mr. Niedermayer, how has the EU been affected by this crisis and by the rise in the electricity and the energy prices, but also by the double-digit inflation, and what sectors are particularly affected? This is, I guess, what our viewers would like to know today.
So first of all, thanks for the invitation, and this is an important debate because European people and businesses are badly affected by current situation. It combines so many factors that are really unique that it's not easy to say the one that is the most important. Also not possible to say that one sector is most influenced. But going back to your question, we should start with inflation, because inflation is really evil. And that's why it's really so important to get inflation under control. We should have in mind that inflation has started relatively quick after, let's say, we started to get from the pandemics and from lockdowns. And surprisingly, and this is definitely good news, the economy was stronger than was expected. So we have seen some inflation pressure, we have seen some demand pressure because the firms were better off, people were better off. At the same time, maybe some of us remember the disruption on supplies. There was a big ship that blocked the strategic route. We have seen some fires in the factories developing the microchips and so on. So this was the start of the inflation. So we should not forget that it started before the energy prices.
That's why I mentioned that the war in Ukraine has deepened this, but the real causes
significantly
of it
deepened, and then the price of energies went up so quickly. And you know, also we should not forget that during the pandemic's inflation, the energy costs dropped down significantly, probably below kind of reasonable level. But then the increase was almost like 10 times. So going back to the sectors, obviously those factories, those businesses that have high consumption of energies will be sooner or later affected. Obviously you can do something about it. The businesses that are less dependent on external supplies, for example, generate a lot of electricity on their own, they are better off. The businesses that locked in price for, let's say, 2 years are less affected. But we should say that generally the businesses that consume a lot of energy or actually take the parts that they are buying from other firms are also energy intensive, they are affected. And then let me go to second stage, and this is why I started inflation is evil. Inflation is such a high that the income of people, the wages or other income, is just declining. The real income is declining. So obviously people have less money to spend. So that means in second stage, also the businesses that are sensitive to the demand, ability of people to maybe go to coffee and buy expensive coffee, maybe go for a little bit more expensive lunch. A lot of these families can see that their income is declining. They need to save more money to have money to pay electricity bills, to buy the foods that is more expensive. they will be affected now. So that's why we will probably see a little bit of economic decline. But unfortunately, this decline is almost inevitable if we want to get inflation under control. So we should not forget, and this is last sentence I want to say, that obviously the government should provide the support for businesses, for households, but at the same time we should have in mind that if support will be strong enough, inflation will stay high, and inflation is very evil. We need to get inflation down.
Evil inflation, and as Mr. Niedermayer mentioned, wages are staying the same. In some countries they are tackling with some sort of indexation, but people are seeing a big chunk of their income being eaten up by bills on electricity and high food prices. So what are some of the immediate effects on the EU's working people?
First of all, what is important to realize that while we talk about a bad hit on everyone in the Union, we have a category that is mostly affected or most affected by these inflationary conditions and the bills. And I'm talking here about the vulnerable people. So for the vulnerable people, right now the choice would be, or it already is, between paying the bills or ensuring a proper meal for their children. So what we are seeing right now is a huge pressure on the have-nots of our society, of the ones that already were really badly hit during the pandemic, and right now again they are suffering because of this particular crisis. And here we are rediscovering topics that they were there in the public space, but we are not that careful about them. For instance, the concept of energy poverty. We have been neglected that, and somehow in this quest for the green transition, we've put together measures related to the Bauhaus initiatives and energy efficiency in buildings and so on. But now we realize how important it is to help the citizens, have a more efficient households and be able indeed to even be prosumers, to produce their own electricity if possible. Now, coming back to the effect on purchasing power, indeed, we see that the vulnerable people are affected, but we also see that categories of medium income population have been started to fall towards the vulnerability. So this is indeed an important social crisis after all. For that, I believe that we need to take the proper measures on one hand to be sure that we do have quite an active labor market policy to be sure that people are not losing their jobs, especially in these conditions, and that we can indeed help people with upskilling and reskilling to try to get better revenue for the work that they are doing. And nonetheless, one important thing is to use the European Fund to cushion the effect, and then, of course, as I'm sure that we have the opportunity to describe, to help them with micro investments that can diminish their bills through programs such as Repower, for instance.
Repower. Can you build up a bit more on that? What is Repower EU?
I mean, Repower EU is targeted right now both at SMEs and households, which is a new addition that the European Parliament has been putting forward with a double target. On one hand, cutting Russia's dependency on gas, and on the other hand, making Europe greener, more efficient, and diminishing the energy bills for, I'm going to repeat that, for ordinary citizens and their households, and as well small entrepreneurs, SMEs. So this is a very important program. It's an EU-labeled program that will be felt starting with, we want to finish negotiation in December. Starting with January, we can have these important micro-investment schemes that can change the life for the better for very many citizens across Europe.
Mr. Niedermayer, on a national level, do you see any differences among EU countries in terms of inflation rates and the way governments are tackling it?
The differences are really substantial. So we can say that in EU or in Eurozone, average inflation is 10%. That doesn't tell you a lot because there are countries that are around 20%. There are countries
like the Baltic countries
that are close to 5%. And it's not easy to clearly see the cause of such a big differences because we can maybe see in the future that inflation will get closer to each other. But let me point out just a few potential reasons. The first is possible that among the countries that the demand inflation, that is not inflation that is caused by high energy prices, is different. Maybe some countries emerge from lockdowns and pandemics with stronger economy, some of them with weaker, combined with the fact that the monetary policy, the central banks were not in some parts of Europe, I would say in majority, very quick to react, that demand inflation can kick off quicker and cause that the inflation really start to accelerate. Then the second very important reason, different reaction by the governments. Some governments took the measures that seems to work somehow, like cut the taxes on energies, for example. And these are the measures that worked. Some of them took measures that doesn't seem to work so well, so that means set kind of temporary price on the energies or even food stock. And what has happened, that it decelerated the inflation, but when the ceilings were removed, there was very fast acceleration. So you have many factors that caused such a big difference in inflation that make it very difficult, especially for ECB that operates the monetary policy across the Eurozone, to react appropriately. But now we can see with the benefit of knowing what has happened that the monetary policy should have been tighter. And we would not get out of this very dangerously high inflation without using both the monetary and the fiscal policy to fight the inflation. And it's really important to get out of inflation to make sure that our economy will get back to steady and sustainable growth. But my best guess is that we can see a little bit less of variation of inflation into the future, especially as these short-term regulatory measures like the ceilings of food or something will fade away. But I should also mention that it is important how we here in the European Union manage the state aid rules. Because I guess it's very important that we keep the single market as fair as possible. And the situation where some member states would use very strong supportive measures for the economy and other states don't have enough money to do that will cause not only differences in inflation but also differences in the fair market competition across
That was
the
going to be my question. How does this impact the competition in our markets?
So first, what we should say, it's fully up to governments to decide how to support the household. And I'm here fully in line with Dragoș, and I guess most economists would say, try to be as targeted as possible. Help the vulnerable ones. I guess it's even time to support the lower mid-income people because they are suffering too. But try to avoid very, very broad supportive measures that are expensive for the fiscal and also has more potential to create inflation. So this is the first. So for households, it's up to the governments. There was a decision also to allow the member states to grant the kind of general support to SMEs. That I guess is pragmatic decision because there are so many SMEs at the market. It's important that we have so many SMEs that administer support on case-by-case basis would be maybe economically wise, but would not be feasible. And for big businesses, we have that temporary framework, and I guess it's important to keep it. Because there are countries, and we both actually came from the countries that don't have very big fiscal space. So the risk is if the possibility for member states to support especially large businesses very generous way is not possible for countries that don't have sufficient fiscal space. So this will create big distortion on the single market. And obviously we are in big trouble now vis-a-vis the countries across the globe that have lower cost of the energy like US, but we should not forget that we need to keep fair market competition across the single market because it's the single market that is the most important economic mechanism that we have in our hands, and we must make sure that single market works as good as it could. to make sure that the economy will get back to sustainable growth again.
How vulnerable are our industries and our working people in such conditions?
I mean, clearly this is a tremendous hit that comes. I mean, we are living in an era of multiple crises. We've just exited or partially exited the COVID one and entered multiple crises, as mentioned by Luděk. So right now, the issue is how can we provide an exit out of this? Regulatory measures, of course, very important. Some sort of targeted support for social situation and vulnerable citizens, very important. But what is also important is to see how we can resolve the demand problem as well. So not just, I mean, we do have an issue here that is very important. So if we will invest in these kind of energy efficiency projects, in helping diminishing the bills and the dependence on electricity, this would mean that we will be able to do two things at the same time. On one hand, to look at our ambition here at the European level to push the green transition, to be top in technologies that would help us, and at the same time to have our citizens less dependent on this kind of volatility related to energy and so on. So that's why I mentioned Repower EU, because the energy bill is concerned every one of us, me, you, the European institution, each and every household and company in the EU, and it's also a weapon against Russia's blackmail on energy. So I think that this is quite important. Now, in terms of the SMEs, very, very quickly on this one, it's also very important to create a safety net so that if we have right now issues in terms of the capacity available of energy, we will be able to put forward schemes such as the ones used in pandemic, like furlough schemes that will be able to cushion the effects on companies, so that if there will be temporary close downs, I mean, at least we will be able to react immediately and have the necessary resources. But of course, we hope that this will not be the case, but we always need to be prepared. And we have this kind of tools at European level that helped tremendously the business sector during the pandemic. And these are part of the lessons learned that we can use right now.
Another important EU law backed by the European Parliament on minimum wage is that on minimum wages that should enforce collective bargaining in the EU. That means that countries can enter, workers, trade unions can enter into negotiations with governments. In many EU countries this exists already. For example, I live in Belgium, and I know for a fact that many people can rely on the fact that their wages will be indexed. There will be some sort of solution found, but this doesn't exist in every country. So how can the EU? How could this crisis speed up the application of these new EU rules? Because this is fairly new, but it takes time to.
Absolutely, I think that the minimum wage is just one of the measures that we are taking under the European Pillar of Social Rights, and the social agenda that we've developed for the last years is right now really, proving its positive effects on especially the vulnerable part of the population. Now, on the minimum wage, we are very proud at the Committee of Employment and Social Affairs that we've been able to finalize the negotiations. And let me just try to give you an angle that is not necessarily, discussed. The minimum wage directive is actually depoliticizing the decision related to minimum wages, because it's actually empowering social partners to have this discussion and providing the mandatory the obligation for governments to have some sort of formulas or to take into account specific indicators in adjusting, and indexing minimum wage. Some countries are already doing it automatically. But what is important right now, and why this is really a topical issue right now, actually the first indicator that needs to be taken into account by member states with the minimum wage is purchasing power. So right now we have exactly this issue where people have lost purchasing power, and if the minimum wage directive would be applied, that means automatically the social partners will start discussing to see how the purchasing power loss would actually be reinstated there with indexation and other schemes. And I think that this is really important for the citizens. Of course, our wish is to have not necessarily more jobs in Europe, but better jobs in Europe, so that we are not going to have too many people being paid at minimum wage. But I would say that this is a very important file and instrument to depoliticize decisions and give the people a chance to exit, you know, the at-work poverty situations where we can see them right now.
Thank you. High inflation is here to stay. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say, in my view, more correct assessment is that it will take time before we get out from high inflation. But we really should not extend this period for longer than necessary. Obviously, the work of the central bank, and I'm speaking a little bit like a former central banker now, is very delicate because it's not only getting from very high inflation, maybe even to negative inflation, it's about landing at the zone of low inflation. This is very delicate job, and this would be way how to reduce the cost of this inflation. So really the target would be to gradually but clearly get inflation down to the zone when it used to be, so let's say between 1 and 3%. I hope the central banks now really have a more clear picture how serious the situation is. So they must really focus on the main goal that is clearly defined in the law, so that means fight with inflation. As I point out at the beginning, I guess that current situation, when we unfortunately experience decline of real income, and Dragoș is very correct in saying that this is unfortunately affecting those most vulnerable. That's why the governments have to pay attention to them. It is this forms the circumstances when inflation will go gradually down. But also providing that governments will not do too much of fiscal expansion. We have seen yesterday Commissioner Dombrovskis stressing that the fiscal policy cannot be so-called expansionary. It should be neutral, because otherwise we will be stuck with inflation above 5–10%, and this will not make any good to anyone, and especially for poor people, because they are affected the most. So I guess we are on the right track. The situation is incredibly complicating. It combines many factors that are not in our favor, but we should not forget also about some positive news. So first of all,
please, if you can end this on a positive
economy
note.
emerged from the pandemics and lockdowns stronger than we expected, and this is a good thing. The second, what obviously something that I highly appreciate, it's not so much economical but political. We were able to find such an incredible unity in reaction to Russia aggression to Ukraine. That is very important. I guess we have never been so close together in Europe, and also with our transatlantic partner US and basically all Western democracies. That is fantastic. And I guess what is amazing achievement, how so far we are handling the energy crisis. In March, if you would ask anyone here if we can handle without Russian gas, the reply would be no, because we were 40% depending on the gas. Now the Russian gas is almost gone, and we know that we will handle. Obviously, we must keep pushing the savings. That is incredibly important. We need to push more for something Dragoș was talking about, more renewables, more energy efficiency. But it seems that we are handling. It's not over. It will still be difficult.
It will take years, probably. It will take years, probably.
It will take years, but we are on the right track. We just cannot slow down. We must keep going. And this is fantastic achievement. Also, we work together. I talk about the state aid, about trying to keep the single market together. I guess we both would agree that this is absolutely essential. So, situation is difficult. To get out of that really high inflation that is very dangerous is not free of charge, but I guess there is quite a good chance that we will handle it. If we keep together, if we keep competent, if we keep focused.
There is a cost to this and to Russia's war in Ukraine, and we've seen a lot of solidarity, as Mr. Niedermayer mentioned. Will we see this solidarity and this unity still be strong in the EU?
I think that this is the best place to talk about it in the European Parliament. We've been acting swiftly and, you know, being the pioneers of solidarity and cohesion in these difficult years in this mandate. And I believe that the main difference that citizens can see in terms of the reaction of EU institutions is that while the previous financial crisis was about austerity and about buckling up and trying to figure out at national level what are the solutions, right now the rule is that we are coming with a common response. The recovery and resilience plans are right now starting to kick in and have their role. Repower is just going directly targeting citizens. And then you have all the other measures that are going to come up with investments in increasing energy supply, reducing demand. And this would be the way in which Europe is reacting. That's the beauty of the European Union's strength when it comes in terms of, testing the values that we are having and also the policies. And I would just like to say that EU policy shouldn't be about spreading helicopter money and populist promises or nationalist things that we need to go back to our turf. This is about relying on the citizens' capacity to act together and to emerge stronger out of each and every crisis. And I would say that these longer-term solutions and the opportunities and reforms and investments that we are putting forward are going to take us out of the inflation crisis as well.
Thank you very much for ending on a slightly positive note, and it's important that our viewers also get an idea of what is going on and how the Parliament and the European Union is tackling the cost of living crisis. And thank you to everyone who followed this live chat. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.